Next up is Josh. Where's Josh? Sort of trying to blend in the back. Where do we find you? Don't be Gollum.
Don't be Gollum.
Ooh.
You guys hear me? All right. I am Josh Green, and I am one of two co-founders of a company called Panjiva and the CEO. And I'm going to do three things tonight. First, going to give you the Panjiva advertisement, tell you a little bit about the company. Two, talk to you about building a data company, what to do and more specifically what not to do. And then three, take questions. So first, a little bit about Panjiva. What is Panjiva? We are a data company that is focused on global trade. So when I talk about global trade, in case there are finance folks in the room, I'm not talking about trading stocks, bonds, talking about the actual flow of goods across borders. So we're a data company that focuses on global trade. Why global trade? Three reasons. One, global trade is a big market. $18 trillion worth of stuff goes across borders every year. Two, it's relatively broken as an economic activity. It is remarkably opaque, remarkably inefficient. Despite the fact that this is a huge market with lots of people making really big decisions that involve lots of money, basically for all of history, this has been a relationship-driven business that is very, very opaque. So you've got a big market that is really broken. We saw a big business opportunity to bring some transparency to this market. So why global trade? One, it's big. Two, it's broken. Three, and this is important to me personally, global trade's important. It is an incredibly powerful economic activity, for better and for worse. It has lifted lots of people out of poverty. It has also done a lot of harm to the environment and to people. And our hope is by bringing transparency to this market, we can expand the benefits of global trade and hopefully round off some of the sharp edges. So, that's what we hope to accomplish. Those are big ambitions, and we're still a small company. But what we hope to do is to have not just a big business, but to have a big impact on the world. If I were in any other building and I were describing what we were trying to build, I would describe us as building a Bloomberg for the global trade community. It feels weird to say that in this building, but that is basically what we are trying to do. So, I suspect most of you are, you're here because you're into data, so I want to tell you where the data comes from that we are using to build the business and ultimately deliver value for people who are involved in global trade. You've all heard of the buzz about the Internet of Things, right? This era that we're entering where stuff will be squawking, telling us where it is and other interesting things. I like to say that we built Panjiva on top of the proto-Internet of Things, which was created somewhat inadvertently by governments around the world. This is the audience participation moment. Anybody know the primary source of revenue for the U.S. government up until the moment the personal income tax was introduced in the early 20th century? Yes? Tariffs on imports. So, turns out governments have cared for a very long time about collecting money off of imports, and so they've collected data about imports. And the U.S. government, and actually other governments as well, have released more and more of this data into the public domain. And it's kind of like the Internet of Things. It's data that is telling you where items are, where they came from, where they're going to, what's inside. It's really interesting data. So we took this data and started playing with it in the hopes that we could derive some insight and ultimately enable people to take action. The theme that everybody's talked about tonight will be the theme that I'll be focusing on. You got to get to action, right? So in order to do that, we had to take this data and organize it. That was a very, very hard problem. My co-founder, Jim Pasota from MIT, built a team that spent a couple of years trying to figure out how to make sense of this data. Once we did, we could do some pretty interesting things. We could map relationships between companies all around the world. If I were being buzzy, I would say it's the social graph of B2B relationships in global trade. So you can map relationships between companies. You can draw insights about individual companies, where they're strong, where they're weak. Other stuff that's pretty cool. So that was what we started building. And in terms of the actual business, we have about 2,000 customers that pay to access the Panjiva platform. We started with what we call buyers, companies that are trying to figure out where in the world they're going to buy product from. And then about 2 years ago, one of my colleagues is in the audience tonight, Bob Gates, not former Defense Secretary Bob Gates, went to Shanghai, opened up an office there, and we started selling data to factories, people on the other side of the global trade transaction. And then more recently, we've started selling to service providers who are moving goods from point A to point B, financing transactions in the world of trade, and investors whose portfolios are impacted by global trade flows and are interested in data about global trade. So that's cool. I'm proud of the business that we built, but we've certainly made our share of mistakes. So what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about those mistakes, but as I'm the CEO of the company, it is my job to whet your appetite for Panjiva data, so I want to do that and do a terrifying live demo. So let me see if I can do that. The only thing worse than public speaking is public passwords. All right, so this is Panjiva. One use case that our customers often are trying to work through is trying to figure out which suppliers they should do business with. Maybe they're looking for a supplier of a particular product, and they want to know where one of their competitors is currently getting that product from. So I could type in Macy's sweater suppliers. Now we're going to pull up 51 companies that have sent sweaters to Macy's. You might use this if you were trying to figure out who to call on. Next up, let's say you couldn't care less about sweaters, but you're kind of a techie, and you're interested in Tesla and what they're up to. You could pull up the Tesla profile and see that shipments to Tesla have been going up pretty nicely. They're doing pretty well. You could see what suppliers they're using, what they're sending to Tesla. Another audience participation moment. As I was preparing for this earlier today, I was looking at this most recent shipment on January 21st to Tesla, and I saw the description AC induction servo motor, and I had no idea what that was. So I looked it up, and I discovered something interesting. You know who invented this? Nikola Tesla. See, you guys knew it, I didn't. So, interesting data. I'm looking for some feedback. Yes. All right. Okay. So if you think this data is interesting, you're going to have a problem building a data business. I think this data is riveting. And it makes it really, really hard to build a data business. And I want to talk to you about why. So let's pull the slides back up. So I'm going to tell you two quick stories about how Panjiva has evolved. And they're both kind of a common theme. So the first is when we first got started. We got really excited about the problems in global trade, but even more excited about the possibility of collecting feedback from people who'd worked with factories around the world. We started thinking about how we were going to evaluate whether the feedback was from somebody who'd actually done business with the supplier. We started thinking about how we were going to rate the feedback itself, all kinds of stuff we were going to do with this feedback. And then we spent 6 months trying to get feedback, and we couldn't get any. And then we said, okay, let's go back to basics. What's the problem we're trying to solve here? And then, as we thought about the problem that we were trying to solve, trying to help people figure out who they could trust around the world, we stumbled across some data, some of the data that I just showed you. And again, we got really fired up. We were like, man, this data is awesome. We're going to be able to do such cool stuff. And we were going to, really do amazing stuff with this data. We had this notion that we would build something called the Panjiva rating, where we would look at a bunch of different attributes of companies based on all the shipping data, and we would put a rating on that company. And we spent months working on this. And then we took it to customers, and they said, we don't care what your rating of a company is. We could care less. And we said, okay, tell us about the problem that you really have that we should solve. And this cycle, I've given you 2 examples of this, but this is, I think, a cycle that has repeated many times at Panjiva, where we get so into data, because we're data guys. We love data. And we get so into it, we lose sight of the customer's problem. And it's only when we return to the customer's problem that we actually make progress. So why is this happening? So this is me when it comes to our data. I love our data. And, you get your hands on the data and you just don't want to let it go. And I think that this is a pretty common thing for people who are into data. And it's a barrier to building a company. So why does this happen? I blame evolution. I'm obsessed with evolution. Don't ask me why, but I blame evolution. So I think we're still very much in the early days of working with data. And I think a lot of the behaviors that have been rewarded in the past are not setting us up for success in the future. So what do I mean by this? If you look at data, or the availability of data up until recent times, data was scarce. And so when you got your hands on data, it made sense to spend a ton of time with that data and try and get every bit of insight you could out of that data. Because who knew when you were going to come across another data set? So data junkies were rewarded because they were the people who had the patience to spend all that time with the data, the courage to really dig in and try and come back out with insight. Great. So that's learned behavior. We've now learned to really wallow in the data. But now we're entering a new era where there's an abundance of data. And those instincts that we had that led us to be kind of in the data business don't serve us particularly well. Because we come across a data set and we sit there and we wallow in it and we try and find the insight in it and we start to love the data, right? But there's a problem. The problem is the data that you're playing with may be totally useless in generating insight that people can then act on. So the real danger in an era of abundant data is really opportunity cost. If you spend too much time playing with a data set that you can't extract value from, you missed an opportunity to play with another data set that you might actually get value from. So the problem that you might run into is kind of the same problem. In the early days with the scarcity of data, you wanted to make sure you got the insight from the data set. Now you still want to make sure you get the insight from the data set, but the real problem is you may spend too much time with the wrong data set. So all this is to say, don't go here. Don't get so attached to your data set that you stop thinking about your customers' problems. And if you can hold on to those customers' problems, you can actually succeed in building a data business. So what's the methodology here? I mean, basically, it's what you've already heard so far. I put this up not because I think this is rocket science. You start with a customer. You think about what problems they really have. Then you identify indicators that would help them solve that problem. And so I think of this as the getting up in the morning and going to bed at night type indicator. What's the thing that you want to know when you get up in the morning because it's going to tell you what you should do that day? And then what's the thing you want to hear at night that'll help you sleep better at night? Answering those two questions usually generates value for the customer. So then you go hunting for data. Back in the old days, if you got data, you were lucky. Now there's tons of data. So go hunting for the data after you've figured out a problem that's worth solving, because God forbid you spend a ton of time with data and find out that there was nothing useful there, or the problem that you can solve with that data actually isn't that interesting. So not rocket science, and I don't put it up there to suggest that it is. I put it up there to suggest that this is hard, to have the discipline to go this way, because the tendency for data folks is to go that way. So I'll take however many questions Matt tells me to take. I do want to say, I've talked a lot about what not to do, which is don't be Gollum, don't wallow in data. But the one thing that I think we've done really well at Panjiva that I think is a definite do is build a great team. A handful of them are here tonight. And if you could raise your hands, I love those guys so much. Bob, who built the business in China, Case, who goes and finds data, Peter, who is our brilliant data scientist, Nicole and Monica, who are the world's best salespeople. Watch out for them, because they will take your money in exchange for data. So any follow-up questions, ask there. But if you have any questions now, Matt, you tell me how many.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you very much. Jim?
Glenn Nye from Palantir. I was wondering if you could just describe some of the biggest problems or most exciting problems that you've worked through with your customers. What are you most proud of?
Say that again?
Just if you can describe some of the biggest problems that you've helped your customers solve, or what are some of the key use cases that you guys are really proud of?
Yeah, so, the use case that we started with is a use case that I would describe as shortlisting. So in terms of trying to understand our customers' problems, one of the ways to get there is to understand your customer's process. And what we found was that our customers had a process that was very painful when it came to finding new suppliers. One of our biggest customers actually told me a couple of years after we started working with them that they used to take white pages or yellow pages or the equivalent thereof in countries around the world and just pull out a list of factories and then go start calling them. And there are other equally painful ways of developing short lists of companies to go talk to. And one of the things that we were able to do by organizing the data is make the process of coming up with a short list of companies to go talk to really fast. And it's interesting because in the early days we thought we were going to be helping people with the process of getting all the way to the finish line. So that, all these companies, the big companies, have huge teams around the world that go and check out factories. And we thought, oh, well, maybe they don't need such big teams. Maybe with data, they can get all the way there. By the way, terrible approach to customers when you're trying to sell to them. But what we found was, no, actually what we can do is handle one piece of the process, but do it really, really well and free up their people to do more higher value add activities. So that's where we started. But I think one of the things that's amazing is kind of how many different problems people who touch global trade have. And we think we're just scratching the surface in terms of problems that we can solve.
Great. So just time for one more.
Courtney Benson, SAP. Could you tell us who some of your partners are? There must be a number of other providers who you would fit in with extremely
Can you think
well.
of any that might? Maybe SAP? Actually, we most of our partnerships have actually been on the data side in terms of pulling data onto the platform. I'll spare you guys the long version of the story, but we actually have not done a lot on the other side in terms of pushing our data onto other people's platforms. But if you come see me afterwards, we can have a great talk about putting our data on SAP.
Great. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much.